One part of growing up that I feel like no one really prepares you for is the slow and infuriating realization that most of the lame cliche phrases you've heard 1,000 times growing up actually have some merit to them, believe it or not. You know, maybe the old people were right for once. Maybe it really is that damn phone. Maybe going for a walk and eating a banana or something might make me feel better, actually. Because being sedentary is actively killing you. You may not notice it may seem slow, but it is very much happening. It increases your risk of diabetes, constipation, heart disease, multiple different kinds of cancer. It increases anxiety and depression symptoms. And the list goes on and on and on. You know, believe it or not walking somehow both makes you very tired and also ruins your sleep at the same time, you know? The worst of both worlds and all that. If you're like me and have a bad memory or just a bad case of brain fog, guess what? That can also be a direct result of not moving your body enough. And the list just goes on and on and on. I could be here for days just telling you all of the effects of not walking. You know, the more sedentary you are, the more you stagnate, the shorter you'll live. It sounds harsh, but it's unfortunately very true. And I'm not saying all this to try and guilt trip you into being more active or to make you feel bad for not going on like a 5-mile run every morning. This is just a rabbit hole that I very recently went down because I watched a video. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I did some more research and realized that walking is so much more of a big deal than I ever could have thought that it was. It seems so simple and like such just a regular part of most people's lives. So I never thought that it could be something so important, you know? How could something I do every day really matter all that much in the grand scheme of things? And yet for a lot of people, even just going on like a 10 to 15 minute walk per day could genuinely be life-changing for them. You know, studies have shown that people that go on just a 20-minute walk per day take 43% less sick days than those that don't. For all my ladies out there, walking 7 hours a week, so just an hour a day, reduces your chances of breast cancer by 14%. That's a big difference in cancer terms. But I can't talk about the topic of people not walking enough without addressing the elephant in the room. Because unfortunately, a lot of the modern world, especially here in the US where I live, really just isn't catered all that well to any means of transportation that isn't an airplane or a car. You know, Americans are so obsessed with the idea of freedom that comes along with cars and having your own modes of transportation that you control that we've unfortunately structured the US and built all the infrastructure in a way that denies people the freedom of safely and efficiently getting around any way other than in a car. You know, most cities in the US are not even remotely walkable. And of course, the ones that are so absurdly expensive, there's no way you're going to be able to live there. You know, the US at this point is almost entirely just planes and cars. And it's sad. You know, when I lived in Texas, there really weren't any good options for walking. And none of the ones that I had were like even remotely enjoyable. I lived in a suburb outside of Houston called Tomball, which is very much not a walkable area. This was my route to work. It was barely 2 miles. And yet I had to take up space on the road every single day, getting there and getting home, because there really wasn't any option other than hopping in a car or on a bike. With the exception of like 20 feet next to some schools, there's really no sidewalk. There's not much shoulder. A lot of the edge of the road just goes straight down into a ditch. There's barely any street lamps. The speed limit is 45, but it's Texas, so everyone's actually going 60. You know, it's just not a road that I would want to go down anyway other than in a motor vehicle, you know? Even on a motorcycle, sometimes it's kind of scary because people don't look where they're fucking going. So I can imagine trying to walk down that or even riding on like a bicycle. It would not be safe. You know, the month where my motorcycle was in the shop was miserable because I had to blow money on an Uber for a 2-mile ride that I would have been more than willing to walk or to ride my bicycle for. But since the road and since the area wasn't structured in a way that made that plausible and safe, I had to put money on Uber and had to ask people for rides, and I had to feel like a fucking bum whenever I was more than willing to walk it if it would have been safe and plausible. You know, really my main options for walking whenever I lived there were I could either go to a gym, walk on a treadmill and just stare at the wall for a fucking hour. I could pace the parking lot of my apartment complex like a madman, walk along the side of a busy highway and risk my life, or go on a like 20-30 minute drive to the most mediocre walking trail I think I've ever seen in my life. So as you can probably imagine, I didn't do much walking whenever I was in Texas. I didn't really do much of anything, honestly. Part of that was was my fault, but a big part of it was also very much just a product of the environment. And I'm sure probably a good chunk of you can relate to that issue. Not only is it hard to find a good place to go on a walk, it's also hard to find the time and the motivation for it. You know, people are working more than ever just to survive, so it's hard to find the motivation to go out of your way to go on a walk whenever you just spent like 8-10 hours working a job that you hate. And I mean, one of my main goals on this channel from the start has been to not get very personal. You know, I don't want you fuckers to know any more about me than you have to. I very much want Edwin Evergreen to be a silly little character on a screen that you maybe tune into every now and then, but overall something very separate from me as an actual person. But I will break that immersion, break that goal very briefly, just to say, I get it, okay, I really do. Life fucking sucks, alright? I won't sugarcoat it. It's not fun, it's not easy. Yes, there are good moments, but there are also a lot of not so good moments, and you can hear the cows in the background. I'm sorry. It is what it is. They like making noise. Sometimes it can be hard to just get out of bed and do the bare minimum to survive and get through the day. So obviously it's not gonna be easy to add something extra onto that. It's not gonna be easy to barely pull yourself out of bed and then tell yourself, hey, we're going for a 40-minute walk today. Suck it up. Especially whenever the world around you feels like it's specifically catered towards making that one simple act of walking as hard as possible. You know, making it so unbelievably hard to do such a simple task in a way that is fun and meaningful. It can be hard to suffer through temporary discomfort in favor of long-term success. I know it is much, much easier said than done. Okay, I'm aware of the reality of the situation. I'm not stupid. Or at least mostly not stupid. It depends on the situation. And I wish I could say that I'm like the perfect model of health, that I'm very much not the subject matter of this video. But that's far from the truth. Okay, I'll be honest with you. I don't do much. I wrote the first part of the script of this video 4 months ago, and at that point I was doing a pretty good job of getting out and going for a walk mostly every day, and also riding a bicycle for at least a couple hours every week. But I'd be lying through my teeth if I said that I have maintained that in any way that is meaningful. Again, we're not getting personal here. I refuse. But I will say, and I will admit, that the spiral of stagnation has claimed yet another victim, unfortunately. So as much as I am making this video as a way to call out something I found interesting and also to have a video for the week, it is also a bit of a call to action of sorts, both for you and for myself. You know, in the words of Spirit Box, stagnation is fatal. Which, slight side note, Courtney, for the love of God, make a hoodie for Fata Morgana. Okay, I need to stop wearing this fucking Holy Roller hoodie. I don't even like Holy Roller. It's far from my favorite song. It's just the only good hoodie design they've ever had. I would do unspeakable things for a good Fata Morgana hoodie. Or even Black Rainbow. I'd settle for Black Rainbow. Or Keep Sweet. Just anything. Why is Holy Roller the only good hoodie you've ever made? It pisses me off. I don't like Holy Roller that much. But rant aside, this is all just to say that walking is one of the most accessible forms of exercise out there. I know obviously there are people with disabilities that can't walk, so this video isn't for you. But for the majority of y'all out there that don't have that issue, maybe consider going on walks. You know, it doesn't have to be 45 minutes like I used to do. You know, like I said, studies have shown that even just 10-15 minutes can actually have a very positive impact on your health, both physical and mental. And if you're in a city or a situation where walking outside isn't very feasible, you can buy walk pads on Amazon for very cheap, which for some people, even if you are in a place where you can walk outside, that still might be a better option because you can just set it up in your room and you can just play video games and walk on this little walk pad. I don't have a walk pad, but I do have a bicycle set up on a very cheap stand in my room, and you would be surprised how many miles I have traveled while sitting on my ass watching people play Slay the Princess. So just find a way to make it as accessible as possible for yourself, and just 10-15 minutes a day can make a world of difference, trust me. Yeah, core theme of the channel is don't stagnate. Don't let time pass you by. Get out there, do something. Even if it is something small that doesn't seem impactful, doesn't seem meaningful, as long as it's positive, it's worth it. Because the clock is ticking and it's not going to stop anytime soon. We are, I think, almost halfway through the countdown and I haven't done shit. I gotta start doing shit, you know? Bye-bye.